다 그래서 레견제 거 쉬어야 돼. 레기선 당한도 가르 쉬버려서는 레렌ting 에바리 에서지다 레다 제보 에바리 제디다 레게 올라되네 제바라되네 제보 디기 줘야 돼. 다 쳐가지마도 개월을 제바되네 미개월 그 동아지예요 말해서 레 미개월 제발라되네 제보 동아 줘야 돼. 다 쳐버리마도 레 미개월 지네 제보 네 내려되네 제보 디기 줘야 돼요 말해서 진짜 레저 소소 에바리 에서지 어도시 나디네 다 레저 소소 에바서 레제 펠 채워를 했을 때 근데 디괴 자와 충분히 말을 매제나 니 제부 채와 안 제부 첨부 동아바도면 용과 용구리 해서 하시나 근데 아직 기회게 자와 충분히 말을 매제바이나 디 제부 디기 안 바도면 봐 개첨부 용구리 해서 용해야 되는데 요래서 레펠 채와 되는 시 지세 다레 맞제바다 밑에 봐서라 레기 저기 개와 맞제바이나 디 제부 아니 제부 디기 요 말했어 한치 미개와 맞제바이나 네 누가요 말했어 제자들이 레 맞제바디 규마사바네 제부요 말했어 레 맞제 맞제바리 했어 레 취미사와레서 따직 소수게 기회 자와지 개와 두바이네 기회 레지 줍산에 디 제부에다 지금 용그레마도 취 그디나 뒤식라 뒤셔다 깨나 대지 체에도 제부 디기디 인지미지 용그레스 되마냐요 말했어 다 미개와로 제나레 미가지 제바이네 달레 미가와데 님보 돕시 돕게 샤바이나 달 제부 동아야요 말와 다 님보 돕시 거기 마샤바 샤자바이나 근데 게디나 님이 뒤수지리야 아니 그런 깨나 저상 체에도 제부 동아디 용그레스 지다다 레제바 취미사와레스나 그 생각도 디골마 직시오도 진시사레.
Good evening. So last time we started to look at the important presentation on karmic cause and effect, and we looked at the first section of the text, which was a presentation on the 4 general characteristics of karma. So we looked at these 4 general characteristics of karmic cause and effect, and the first being that from virtue it is definite, from virtuous causes it is definite that happy results or pleasant results will follow. Moreover, from non-virtuous causes, it is definite that suffering results will follow. And secondly, we looked at how from a small karmic cause, a far larger or a great karmic result can follow. And this can come about through regular repetition of something one sees as insignificant. And thirdly, we looked at how one does not meet the karmic results if one has not created those specific causes. So therefore, if there's a specific result one wants, one must accumulate those causes. And fourthly, that the karma that one has created, it doesn't dissipate. Just because it hasn't ripened over an extensive period of time, it still carries that potential to ripen, unless it has been purified. So these then were the 4 general characteristics of karma, and we looked at this last time. So we'll continue then in the text, where we now, having looked at the general characteristics, we'll come to the specific characteristics, in particular, that of the 10 paths of action. So in the text at the very bottom of page 121, we see here that this second major outline, so we looked at the first, the general characteristics, now we come to specific characteristics. It has 2 points, the principal teaching of the 10 paths of action, and then secondly, establishing actions and their effects.
Esada lelam chusedi, then Gawala soon yores and Donala soon yore, Tenjana soon yores, wada, lelam chusedi, Donala soon yore, and the day, and the chickity to Korea, and the Pandunagi, Tenjana soon yores.
The source of this material is in the sutras, so the teachings from the Buddha, as well as the shastras, the commentaries by the great Indian Pandits.
And in Zada, Dedarsa, Dedugi, Guri, Sosur, Nebadang, Lepel Chavadang, Majebadang, Miching, Jeba, Chu Mizawa, Riba, Delesa, Jebu Jitajik, La, Neto Tomaring Neba, Guinea, and then Longdor Jashanas.
So the top of page 122 is the first of those two outlines, the principal teaching of the 10 paths of action, and this has three sub-outlines. The first being is the presentation, establishing that these 10 paths of action were taught by the Buddhas from the sutras as well as from the shastras. So you have first generated certainty concerning the ways of actions and their effects through the understanding that happiness and suffering are certain to occur as effects of their specific causes, that karma increases greatly, that you do not meet with anything you have not created, and that karma does not dissipate. Now, which actions should be adopted and which rejected?
다 된디기 리바 델레스 데니 손체베 데니기 대수니서 하고 델레 때네 안당 저기 레당 레데네서 레당 레간스리 디테고 간스리 해야돼 어찌 델레당 지비 수치라실라 토마르 녜바니 당보 디하고 야고 하고 지고를 해서 그렇다 토마르 녜바 니네 랑도자 진짜 당보 간에 사고래 안데니 하원이디 랑도르 방야디 방야다 냠술래야디 냠술래야 간에 지고를 해서 숨어와다 다두스네 지금 좋은 수도 매데디니 그 제간에 지고를 해서 고한테 디워로 차고를 와다 근데 레당 디르바디선 디진열 셰바 다 레사 직제 레디기 제부제 다 출지라와 실라 토마는 해봐야 당보 간에 실라 하고 제고래서 하고 해봐지 하고 와제 되네 안는 냠소랑 고래 해서 지기네 랑도르 자신 랑세디 바 개회자와 냠술이야다 도르세디 미개회 자와지 바 도르야디 간에 제고래 해서 나왔습니다. 송월
So we could start in the English, the order is just a little different, so we're going to start in the middle of the second line. That happiness and suffering are certain to occur as effects of their specific causes, that karma increases greatly, that you do not meet with anything you have not created, and that karma does not dissipate. So this here presents the four general characteristics of karma that we looked at last week and are mentioned already in brief tonight. So they're just being recapped here. Now we go to the first sentence, or the first line. So you have first generated certainty concerning the ways of actions and their effects through this understanding. So now one has reached at the point which we have, that one has studied the first 4 pages, first 4 points, and now has this understanding. Now through this understanding, a question will come. Now we move a little bit further on. Now, so this is what would come to mind, having learned those 4 general characteristics of karma, or having come to this understanding. Now, which actions or which karma should be adopted and which rejected?
데레자 다 간에 지어서는 다 don나랑 주기다 레사테 간에 연구를 간에 싸고 간에 연구를 해야지 하고야지 디 제보 안에 간에 연구를 해야지 디 하고야 돼 간에 사고 디 하고 지고래 디 하고네 안바 안에 지 제보디 다 동아야게 제보 뒤에는 실내된 연구를 해서 하고야도 제가 동아 미디어 봐서 동아야 귀디파 방고를 해서 돌고 해서 그러다 단 인글레 간스til에 디기 연구를 해서 파 레드는 실내 제보 디기 연구를 해서 두신 하고야도 되니 digi debaza digi duwege yu ane gewatsu lango kure sach den sungorwa da na yimbo direda.
So the essence of these of this first part that we're looking at here is that now that one has come to understand an understanding of karmic cause and effect, then various questions will come to mind. To understand that karma is definite, that it increases greatly, and that one will not meet results if one has not accumulated the causes, and that the causes accumulate will not naturally waste away or dissipate. So understanding this then, there are certain results I do want to experience. So therefore, those results of happiness, they must have their own causes. So what are those causes that I need to then accumulate so as to achieve my desired results? So that is this term adopt. What are the causes I should be adopting? And likewise, not wanting to experience any problems or difficulties, what are the karmic causes that I need to avoid accumulating? And that is the meaning of the word rejected. So therefore, having come to understand the presentation of karmic cause and effect, what is it that I should be engaging in and what should I be avoiding?
Ana jidang jir so jir leje nieji gi jebo jubi gi ngoni sumdo ngelas gosum gi nge mi ge tamje ane lelam jur madu kyang nge mi ge chelong rapa ane kana madu bi shichewa nam jumnen digi isa nin dyune nabwe lelam jur songshings.
Continuing in the text. In general, the doorways for engaging in good conduct and faulty conduct are determined as 3. Although not all virtues and non-virtues are the 3 doors are included in the 10 paths of action, the Blessed One summing up the essential points stated the more obvious or coarser virtues and non-virtues, the main basis of misdeeds being the 10 black paths of action.
Longche tenik bechita be longche basen bechita segurada bechita da sosu nyoya de ode jidane da jidane leche nieche se jeza de niki jebol juba de la juye de la ane lamgal mason sumre se da lamgal ko juda lamgal mason sumre ko sum do ngera as ko sum do ngera res dimado ko sum mate she degle ha mare so jeza di ko sum gar sempe nga dirwa Lunga Yisumzwa, that is a diva penele, Niejuge, Lerjo Jebena, and the Lunga Yisum Yukone, Yahuche, Delatine, Tewu, and Degi, Jig, and Lunga Degi, Yoyachingurwa. Then Member Chebana, Javan Member Chebina, and you Kosum Lunga Yisum Gone Chenema, the Shan Jaseomarwa, the Nagu Gone Maji, Luju Gone Maji, Gone Majena, Dinigi, Javan Member Vishi Yomare. 네 자와 상보를 제면 제가 당한 자와 상보 제디에 룽아 유스미 권에 제야래 제가 고숨자다 냠바로 제번에 룽아 유스미 권에 제자다 개월 사번에 룽아 유스미 권에 개월 사고래 ndelaten 제보티기하다 단 디바 사번에 룽아 유스미 권에 디바 사고래 제가 ndelaten 한주 제보동아야 제가 디네 연사당 한주 간제래 당보 지단에 한주게다 되니게 야고체스나 두부체스나 되니게 제야디다 개화사스나 룽아 유스미들이 고숨 룽아 유스미 권에 사고고래 되네 냠바로 제베나 룽아 유스미 권에 디바사야 돼 룽아 유스미 권에 사고고래 제가 고숨 능에 세도다 먼저 개화사야기 고디야 룽아 유스미 안에 류주 권에 개화사야 하는 가이군 이주 권에 개화사는 모두 디숨의 셴비게다 개화사 디숨 베제마다 하지 먼저 개화사야지 메레죠 당 디바사바이네 안에 류주권의 디바사야 나유권의 디바사 이 유권의 디바사 모두 룽아 유스미권의 마사바지 디숨의 셴비게다 디와사야지 메르와 제가 디네 자당 저기 데니기 고숨도 녜라 세 디시고다 고숨도 녜세.
So looking at the sentence in general, the doorways for engaging in good conduct and faulty conduct are determined as three. So good conduct we could call virtuous conduct or wholesome conduct, and faulty conduct we could call unwholesome or non-virtuous. And there are three pathways or doorways by which one accumulates either wholesome or unwholesome conduct. And these three are those of body, speech, and mind. It's through behavior, a wholesome physical behavior, speech, or mental activity that one accumulates wholesome or virtuous or good karmic causes. Likewise, it's through our unwholesome or our faulty karmic causes are also accumulated either through physical behavior, through verbal behavior, or through our way of thinking. And there are no other doorways. So there are two. Karma is primarily wholesome or unwholesome, and there are only three ways that it can be accumulated: through our body, our speech, and our mind. So if those karmic causes accumulated through physical, verbal, or mental behavior are wholesome, then results of happiness will follow. And if that karmic conduct through our physical behavior, our speech, or our way of thinking is unwholesome or non-virtuous, suffering is what will result. So these are fixed. There are only these three doorways or pathways through which karma can be accumulated, whether wholesome or unwholesome.
안디네 자다 고숨기 게미게 탐제 레람 줄 마두경 소다 제사당은 저 고숨이 게미게 레람 탐제세도다 마주게 류조권에 나도권에 사페게 미게와 데니 게와 시차기로와 데니 이 류조권에 사페게와 숨제 뒤데 이권에 사페게와 숨제 게와 주 데니게 게와 주들에 게위레람 주시오래 게위레람 주세 데네 아직 나가고권에 사페게 미게와 시제 류조권에 사페 미게와 시제 데니 이권에 사페 미게와 숨제 대손 주어들라 안에 미게위레람 주세야지 숨을 제자다 고숨기 소라다 가지고 류가 이숨권에 사페게 게위레람 주다 미게위레람 주 안에 제자다 류가 주세 게위레람 주세다 미게위레람 주스티제 다데니 고숨이 게미게 탐지 레람 주를 마디게 하시던 안에 류가 이숨권에 사페 게와 가리네 안에 류가 이숨권에서 베 게위 레람 주나라 뒤그레베스나 디나네 마듀바 요레세 인지메지 주나 듀고 말에 마듀바 요레세 다음 류가 이숨권에서 베 미가와 딜라야 미게베 류가 이숨권에서 베 류가 이숨이 레람 주나라 마듀바 안지 디나 마듀바 용구레세 제자다 마듀바 요레 뒤장서 뒤장 아니 이나다 아니 마듀바 안도도 얘네디 마손.
So looking at, although not all virtues and non-virtues are the three doors, are included in the 10 paths of action. So just to, first as the translator to repeat, this word you'll see throughout the text, action, is just the English for the Sanskrit karma. So the translator sometimes uses the Sanskrit, sometimes the English. So when we see here like 10 paths of action, it could be the 10 karmic paths. It would be the same term. So what Geshe said, so although not all virtues and non-virtues of the three doors are included in the 10 paths of action. So the 10 paths of action are what we are going to come to look at now in the very next section. And these are 3 which are physical, 4 which are verbal, and 3 are mental. And they are both virtuous and non-virtuous. So there are 3 physical, 4 verbal, and 3 mental paths of virtuous action, as well as the same enumeration of paths of non-virtuous action. And the question that is being addressed here is, do these 2 groups of 10 encompass all virtuous and non-virtuous karma? And the answer is not at all. They do not, in the 10 virtuous karmic paths of action, this does not include all virtuous karma. And likewise, with the 10 non-virtuous karmic paths, all non-virtues are not subsumed there.
줄 송어래 제대 개 미게 안에 주송어래 람나 지 베네 미가 류가 유스미에 개와 가르사바네 개와 차사 개베게 주나를 두면도와 안에 미가와네 미게베게 주나를 두면도 미디는 주가르지는 송어래스 가르지는 송어래스 아치 송고 다디 만족에 셈나라 라신이 도감 그 주와 용식이와 용구와 제가 가르지는 송어래스나 개 미래 미게 첼롱감스네 지 첼롱감스 라과 근데 네 첼롱감스 라과 라과 두 라과 되게 셰바레 차신 타와되게 순요 말해서 제자디네 릉아 이숨이 개와 라과는 쪼셔와되게 했어 안 쪼셔와다 안줄이야 안저 소수게 볼래 중요하다 용대와디 되네 미가와디네 릉아 이숨이 미가 라과 just 라과되게 두치는 소말에서 개미기 첼롱 맘 라과 카나마토바스 디버이 바데 디버 시게 차와 제대네 디버 영화야기 디버 쉬시 베네 시첨부 만줄래 영화야기 되네게 디버 차와 되네 되게 대한 소말에서 차와 남당 그래서 되네게 차와 남 아니 좀 된디게 바 되네게 류기 베는 아주 릉아 요건에 류 베케와 미게와 라바체 그래서 라 되네게 아주 제 영화야기 배좀 대다 되네게 제발 되는 아주 디바 이 동화 첨부 용어야기 시계 쳐 제부 동화 빠도 매 첨부 용어야기 대 디바되게 봐 점낸 되게 배내 뒤니에서 donda 주님 보니 뭐배 내가 첨부 되게 봐 계셔 쳐 되게 수 뒤체 아니 나불래람 주스 송바 해지래
Previous segment, we saw that karma can only be accumulated through the body, speech, and mind, so through those three doorways, and that is definite. And therefore, these 10 virtuous and non-virtuous actions can only be accumulated by means of physical, verbal, or mental behavior. So those three doorways, that enumeration is complete, it's definite. But in terms of the 10 virtuous and non-virtuous actions, that enumeration is not complete. So hearing this then, the question that will naturally arise is, well, why 10 then? Why was this specific group created of 10 non-virtuous actions and 10 virtuous actions? Why specifically this group? So looking at this then, the Blessed One, summing up the essential points, stated the more obvious or coarser virtues and non-virtues, the main basis of misdeeds. So what the Blessed One or the Buddha did is he took the coarsest or most obvious non-virtues that beings engage in and comprised a group of 10. So this group of 10 again is not at all exhaustive, but rather those which are very powerful and can easily occur and bring heavy results. So that is why these two groups of 10 were created, the 10 which are non-virtuous and the opposite 10 which are virtuous. Because by avoiding the one and engaging in the other, one ensures that one's future projection, one's lives to come, will be radically different than if one was not engaging in adopting the 10 virtues and avoiding the 10 non-virtues. So this is why the Buddha created this enumeration into 10, because these 10 are the most obvious and coarser virtues and non-virtues, which can have a great impact on our lives to come.
지금 동화 빠도면 뭐 냐와 기어가 이다스 기어가 되니게 기에게 동화 빠도면 뭐 동화 침보 용거에게 귀디 다시 카나마도 시체와서 카나마도 디바 시체와서 디 제부 동화 빠도면 뭐 동화 식치보 용거에 되게 지난 디네자 시체와서 답변을 소줘봐 소주베데 류유권에 소줘봐다 안에 마침발렘 바다 안에 지 로엠 제바 되니게 제바이나 지난 되니게 소줘발래 되네 안디기 소주비 레람 직사반의 류유권의 소주비 레람 당아주 레람 디사반의 안디기가 기어선 개와치만 나서는게 냐와다 냐완마 끼네 되니 예외 동화 빠도미 용거 차거로 지다 되네자 디 소주바디게 근데 카나마도 디바 배 첨부해서 시체와 제부 첨부 용거에게 책을 해서 지다 되니게 이다게하다 되네 둘로게 지다 되니게 당아주 류유권의 마기권의 이권에 되게 디바 첨부차 디기 안 제부 동화 빠도메 뭐 용거여서 근데 카나마도 디바 배 시체와 돼서 디스모 시체와 돼.
This expression, the main basis of misdeeds. So in terms of, so the misdeeds refers to the non-virtue. So these 10 non-virtues, if one accumulates them, they lead to intense suffering in lives to come. In particular, if one accumulates any of these 10 as a complete karmic action, and they lead to propelling a karmic imprint, propelling a next rebirth, that being a non-virtue will lead to rebirth in the lower realms. And for example, if one kills, if one steals, or engages in sexual misconduct, so those are the 3 in the 10 to do with physical behavior. If one of those misdeeds, if that resulting karmic imprint ripens at the time of death as a propelling karma, it will lead to rebirth in the intense suffering lower realms. And if that imprint is of great magnitude, it will lead to rebirth in the hells. If it's of middling strength, it will lead to rebirth as a spirit. And if it is of slighter strength, it will lead to rebirth as an animal. So therefore, we see how these 10 non-virtues are the main basis for misdeeds, in that they are coarse and easy to recognize, they're obvious, and therefore it's indispensable we avoid what is otherwise not so difficult to accumulate because of the strength of the potential ripening result.
당한지 넘기네 다지게 그디나 아주 지기 디바방을 류가 유숨이 디바방 고레스 안을 류가 있으면 개와 주보레스지 안 냠소 랭고레스 같은 넘기네 다지 양생한테 어떻게 디나디 희고로 와다 시어로 와 다디 시고 다디 넘기시다 안을 류가 유숨이 디바방 고레 개와 주보레스 직순고레 다디 마셔야 되나 다디 넘기셔야 되지 봐 류가 유숨이 개와 가르서는 디바 가르람나 근데 준시베 디바르와 참아지베기 디바르 나기 디바르와 나기 디바시르와 준 참아 지수 나캬시베게다 준시베 디바 근데 참아시베 디바 지베 디바 되네 지수시베 디바 나기시베 디바시리 나기와 시 미가와 시리제 나 리지 미가와 숨데가르스는 리주고네 소지베기 디바 아니 제 마침발림베기 디바 아니 지게 로엔지베 디바티브 숨디제 이유고네 나셈 뇌셈 로타키비 디바숨 디주들에 당하지 류기 미가와 숨세 미가와 주세데 제가 미가와 주디 방고라서는 미네 당서 디 시고래 제가다 데디디 다 미기웨 레람 주세디 다가는 주디레 디주레다 다 되는 마시에다 되스 디 잘마선 제 개발 되스 한지 예술 마선에 한지 마로 시고로다 다 미게베 레람 주세다 다 되니기 다 주디 마지용도 그런 차상지 차와라 느끼见로 튀긴 친 가르가르 고고를 해야지 디차나 골레람 안놈윤 소주베 레제나 아니 냐왈 기그레스지 지당 시자마도다 다 소주베 다 되는 맛이다 소주베 레디 냐와 기게 레람 세디 차발라 코긴 가르가르 고고를 해야지 다마 제시로 좀 봐서나 자기를 다 당시 송거래 지상 되네자다 nganzu migiwe lelam chusede namyun she nganzu de lunga yusmi migo judile sungore judile ane gewe lelam chusede yang namye she gida lunga yusmi migo ju dokcho gewa jubodile gewe lelam chusiko da lelam namyun dang namye she migo juda gewa chusema de lelam se de tan 비시 된 거마 다디는 마 레람스 자체는 그 바자기였던 거를
You will have heard many times the statement that we need to abandon the 10 we need to abandon non-virtues accumulated through our body, speech, and mind, that we need to engage in virtue through our body, speech, and mind. And you would have probably expressed this many times in your own recitation of prayers or meditation and so forth. So this is something that's quite commonly expressed, that I need to refrain my body from engaging in non-virtue, my speech from non-virtue, and my mind from non-virtue. And you need to utilize my physical behavior for virtue, my speech for virtue, and my way of thinking, my mind for virtue. So this is a very common presentation in the Dharma, and you will have heard it many times, and to yourselves expressed it many times. So let's just recap then briefly. What are these 10 non-virtues? And what are the 10 virtues? So the 10 virtues are just the opposite of the 10 non-virtues. They are the intentional refraint from the 10 non-virtues. So the 10 non-virtues, I mentioned the 3 to do with physical behavior. So that's killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. Then there are 4 to do with speech. So lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and purposeless speech. And then there are 3 to do with the mind: covetousness, harmful intent, and wrong views. So these then are the 10 non-virtues. They'll be looked at in more detail from the next page, or looked at individually in more detail from the next page. The purpose of this presentation to come is so that we can understand in detail what is meant by each of these non-virtues, so that we can, as we see a little higher up, what we just looked at a little earlier tonight, so that by understanding the 10 non-virtues, understanding each one well, we know exactly what we are to reject. So what does it mean? What does killing mean? What does stealing mean? And so forth. So that when we understand this clearly, we know how to reject it, and thereby we do not accumulate those causes that will otherwise lead to suffering. And so too, with the 10 virtuous actions, understanding them well, we know exactly what we should be adopting, and thereby how to, through our physical behavior, our speech, our mental activity, accumulate extensive virtue that will lead to happy results in the future, to desired goals. So this then is the meaning of the 10 virtuous karmic paths, or the 10 non-virtuous karmic paths.
야 안에 제 상여 고마토야 람 고마 소랑 고마 또 람세데 상예살이야 조사데 람스도와 지난 니냠소 렘발라 때네어서 상예살 두고요 봐서 람나 거봐 제자당 안쪽에 소주비기 레디게 레기 람소 디가르스는 소주비기 레디 사바 델 때네어서 나솔 마 두고로와 제자 나솔 조에게 람갈마선 디리해서 델는 줘 제자 미기베 레지 lunga yusumgi migiwe le sa yodu dela tine anjuge ngason le kiwa ma di masaba na ngason king mas jesa da ngason doye ge lamgal ma sona anjuge migiwe ju le dige an lunga yusumgi le de da dela tine ngason do gorwa jesa do za ko ngason doye ge ngaso josa lamga na shinji inzada dela tine do za ngaso pasu do de lamga le tine do na dine ngason le ma doye de dela tine do go ba sa ne jesa da dela ya legi lamda de migewe legi lam da gewa chubo dela tene nga juge gewa chubo dela tene dine nyamso lam cholam jolam dus lam nyamne ba dela tene lam digi pa yeje ya tarbada sanyo boba towa de gewa chu nyamso lemba dela tene to hoza ane gewe lam la 상예 탈바다 탐지케바 예와치마 온도다 온도다 누고바다 탈비고바다 상예고바 줘야 될야 아는 미외 주봉의 수림 송제 안 될라드네 토부고에자 될 개와될 류가 있으면 개와 주보될 개외 람 레람 되네 미 레들 개외 레람 나다 레람라고 하데 두두스레 김산마
We see this term, for example, in the outline, then outline at the top of the page, paths of action or karmic paths. So let's talk a little bit then about the usage of this term path and what it means here. Because up to this point, where you will have heard this word path, is in the context of the mental paths which are developed culminating in the attainment of Buddhahood. So there are those 5 paths of accumulation, preparation, and so forth. They're leading to the path of no more training, the attainment of Buddhahood. So this is usually where we hear the term path. And path refer, as in general society, the general usage, is a path or a road is a way of travel. And so generally, where you generally hear this term path is in terms of these mental paths that we strive to cultivate, that will lead, will enable one to travel to the attainment of the desired destination of Buddhahood. So that's maybe you could say the etymology of the term path here. So specifically though, in terms of karmic path or paths of action, with karma and action being the same word. So these paths of action or karmic paths, they are paths that lead to a particular destination. If the karmic path is one that is virtuous, it will lead towards the attainment of those 5 paths, culminating in the attainment of Buddhahood, the path of no more training. If the karmic path is non-virtuous, that leads to an undesired destination of rebirth in the lower realms. So this term path is used because if one cultivates a path, one will arrive at that particular destination, at the related destination. Conversely, if one does not accumulate a particular path, one will not arrive at that destination. So in terms of the non-virtuous karmic paths, if one does not accumulate the specific non-virtuous karmic paths, one will not arrive at the destination of such paths, which is rebirth in the lower realms. On the other hand, if one does accumulate these non-virtuous karmic paths, they lead to rebirth in the lower realms. And then the opposite is the case for virtuous karmic paths. These are the ones we do want to accumulate, because these lead to the paths of spiritual development. So through accumulating virtuous karmic paths, that virtuous karma, or virtuous karmic paths, these lead to the attainment of the 5 spiritual paths, and the 5th one is that of Buddhahood. So these are our desired destinations. So this then is the meaning of the term path in the context of non-virtuous karmic paths and virtuous karmic paths.
아니 레게 람사지 지금 준시빌레 단 준시빌레 람이 지과차 다데데 지단 준 남긴 지단은 가지야 셰드 미가 주서 준시빌게 미가 와서 제가 준시 미가 마데 레슨 자가 말하다 다데네 준시빌 레스 자원도다 레스 자원도 디네기 준시빌 레데다 아니 준시빌 람람나 지과르데 지디고니 다 제순 준시빌 람서 내가 계주지 자외 돈을 걸어라 지시오 순고로와 지단 준시빌 레세다 준시빌 람세인 지바로 자도와.
Let's take the non-virtuous act of lying. So it's a verbal non-virtue, And the way this would normally be expressed is it's the non-virtuous karma of lying. But it can also be expressed as the non-virtuous karmic path of lying. So here we can say that in general, really, they have the same meaning or very similar meaning. So the expression again that how it's normally expressed is we talk about the negative karma of lying. So we just use the word karma, but we're seeing here in the presentation of karma that the term karmic path is also used. So in the context of lying, we could say the karma of lying or the karmic path of lying, and they would have the same meaning.
The Junshibiki Migawa said, Junshibiki Les and Antus Kari. Junshibiki Migawa in Junshibi Le in Gugomare. Junshibiki Le Horo, Junshibi Migawa Le Nigare. The Junshibi Le in Migawa in Junshibi Le in Gugures and Digoya Manager. Junshibi Le said, and Junshibi Le in Migawa said, Nyungore. Because Junshibi Migawa said, Junshibi, the Benedigo. Junshib, Junshib, Junshib Migawa says that Junshib Migiwe Le said, Nyungore. She said Junshib Migiwe Le Horo, Junshib Migiwe Le, Tibaya, Migawa, Nigare. Migawa said the Dibala, right? Migi, Junshib, Junshib Migawa, Junshib Migiwe Le, says our. That is all. 제자다 준시베 레당 준시베기 미가와 있나 준시베 레인 구구가 말해지 준시베 미가와 있나 준시베 레인 구구가 말했어 미가와 레인 구구 말해지 다 준시베 미가와 레디 미가와야 돼 준시베 미가와야 돼 준시베 미가와 레라 니가 해지 왔다 다들 내게도 막 무시해
Oh yeah. So the non-virtue of lying and the non-virtuous karma of lying, these can be the same, they can be different. So let's be but clearer than what the translator just said. So the non-virtue of lying is not necessarily karma. And I'll say it again. The non-virtue of lying is not necessarily karma. The non-virtuous karma of lying, this necessarily is karma and non-virtuous. So the first one, non-virtuous lying, or the non-virtue of lying, this is non-virtuous, but it's not a karma. Non-virtuous karma of lying, there it is necessarily karma as well as non-virtuous.
Sheba Gion, Sheba Gi, Drugum the Giore, Sem Dambo Sem Giore, Sem Di Hola, Towa, Dushi, Semba, Ilacheba, Rabase, Kundrongache, and the Zosemche, Condos Druk, Sheba can escape and I did Druk dinner, Drugnum the Yumgorda. The dinner Drugnum the Megan Sheba Jiki Omare. My Dambodi Dambol of the Sheba Kanish Himina, and the Sheba said, Drukium the Yungore, so same chick, Dicolia, Towa, Dushi, Samba, Ilachib, Ravas, and Nache, then Denico Drukium the Yungmato, Sheba Chiraji, Ganyum, Omare. Gedi Sheba Kanis giving a mother one shade in the Yi Sheba, and I can see Sheba Kanis giving a so same chiore, and Dicolia, Kundong Asset, did Druk the Yum the Keyboard, Agadina.
Every consciousness, so in our context of karma, whether there's karma being created that's virtuous or non-virtuous, but really every single consciousness itself has 6 components to it. There is a main mind and 5 omnipresent mental factors. So these 6, a main mind and 5 omnipresent mental factors. Those mental factors being feeling, discernment, intention, mental engagement, and contact. So you have these 5 mental factors, feeling, discernment, intention, mental engagement, and contact. 5. plus a main mind. So these 6 are present for every single consciousness. And if karma is created, it can be virtuous or non-virtuous, these 6 will be present.
Di drugnane, di druga migaware versus migaware cheta. Di druga migaware. Da dinane migiwe le de karasana, dinane dushe de le mare, migiwe le mare, sem de migiwe le mare, sowa de migiwe le mare. Da dinane sowa dushe semba se jorwa. Di semba dida dinane ngabo di drugnane chi semba se dida migiwe le dire da zunshwe migiwe le di dinane semba se migiwe le dire. 그러 미겨와래 미준시 미겨래야래 샹다 코님도 이게 샹다가디 준시베 미겨와래마도 준시베 미겨래 말해라고 그러다 어두스게
Let's then look at the consciousness of lying. So when one is engaging in lying, with the consciousness of lying, you'll have the main mind, as well as the 5 mental factors of feeling, discernment, intention, mental engagement, and contact. Lying is, by its nature, non-virtuous. It's naturally non-virtuous. So therefore, all 6 of these consciousnesses, the main mind and the 5 mental factors, are non-virtuous. Because one is engaging in lying, so the associated consciousnesses are non-virtuous. But whilst all 6 associated consciousnesses are non-virtuous, they are not all karma. So they're not all non-virtuous karma. All 6 are non-virtuous, but only 1 is karma. So the one that is karma is not feeling, it's not discernment, it is that of intention, and it's not mental engagement or contact. It is that mental factor of intention that is karma. All 6 are non-virtuous because one is lying, but only one of the 6 is both non-virtuous and karma, and that is intention.
고숨기에 개미게 탐지 레람 줄 마두스 두고 말했어. 제자당 주기 주인시베게 미가와디나 주인시베게 미게벨렌 레나라 두고 말이다. 레람나라 두고 말했어. 진짜 마두바데 주인시베 내가 보자 데티 소와 두셰 아니 제 가서 레아바다 아니 셈 조심 딩가디 제자 주인시베게 미가와레디 주인시베 미게벨 레람 말이다. 준시비 미겨와래 준시비 미겨래란 말이야. 제자다 되네게. 준시비 미겨와래 준시비 미겨래란 말이야. 레 말와다 레 말세 레기 남네 말와. 제자 준시비 가서 준시비게 레람난 마주세 레 레겔 레디 차고 말와디. 제제 레람이 마다 되지 소와 두시 연방은 저기 제가 semba디 레르와 제가 레람세 내가 좀 미기위 되게 미기와 레람 주세 뒤로와다 근데 주인시베 미기위 레 근데 지금 얘네 안에 직수 참아 된마 주세 레람네 쳐서 레람 차도로와다 어디 디나데서 초 대대 순등의 셈제 초와 두시 일하지마 레화세 되게 디나디 다 미기위 미기와 레마도 미기위 레데 말이에요 레람네 말이에요 미기벨레드 마레스.
Going up to start of the sentence above, although not all virtues and non-virtues of the 3 doors are included in the 10 paths of action. So this is what we're looking at, what I'm talking about now, this particular section. So if we think, again staying with that of lying, so when one lies, there's consciousness involved. All those consciousnesses, the main mind and the 5 omnipresent mental factors, are non-virtuous, because lying itself is non-virtuous. However, they are not all karmic paths or karma. That refers to just one of the 5 mental factors, namely that of intention.
Adonala dajigan zu migiwe lelam juse de ganjele manju lunga yi sumji migiwe le judela lelam juse migiwe le judela da lelam ju da dine dinade da diko karesene di sungo sumba de chumne di ko desa bala dine anju ben mansola ke ki yudi ben shige chewar de la den jibu dunga bado me nyonga di yudi dela den yongo re se shige chewar es den da chumne ke dine chusumba res 다 되네게 대다 빵나 된신도 체비게 내자다 어디 상유 주장도 수행해 봤어요서도 아 기대 제가 봐도 여러 봐당이 다데 대다 빵나 된신도 제송소데 예셰서봐 제가 다 대다 빵나 시대 되네게 레람 주보데 파빵바이나 안에 디 도쇼 기위레람 주주용으로 봐 빵연도 신도 된신도 체와 빼던다 대부 된다 신도 체부 예천부 체고 그래서 이게 신도 체비게 네 남장 되네게 주르두어 시그니스 대지다다 기벨름 주나나 되네게 된 방바이나 되네게 된다기 예천부되게 디주나래 뒤어서 되네게 뒤바디 안상이게 두시 캠 시제 아니 Carbiolum Jusonres, Carbicina Gavilum Jus, Carbosade, gave us a Carbiolum Juson Diesa.
What we've seen thus far is that the karma, whether virtuous or non-virtuous, is necessarily accumulated by way of the 3 doors, the body, speech, and mind. And we've seen that karma and karmic paths, we can generally say, are the same thing. But if we're looking in detail at the various aspects of consciousness, there we'd only say one aspect of consciousness, that of the mental factor intention, is karma or karmic paths, and the others would be virtuous or non-virtuous, but they would not be karma. So the other 4 omnipresent mental factors and the main mind. So that's what we've seen thus far. Now just concluding with the paragraph. So we've looked at the Blessed One summing up the essential points, stated the more obvious or coarser virtues and non-virtues, the main basis of misdeeds being the 10 black paths of action. So black paths, it's one expression, it means non-virtuous or unwholesome karma. So these 10 are singled out because they are easy to see as harmful, and they are very commonly engaged in. So hence we have here obvious and coarse. And moreover, the result of them is suffering, and potentially intense suffering, in that they can lead to rebirth in the lower realms. Hence, the Buddha specifically chose to draw these 10 out. Now, we continue in the text. Having seen that, when they are abandoned, the most significant points are also included in those 10. He taught that the 10 white paths of action. So white paths of action, then, this is also an expression that refers to wholesome or virtuous karma. So the meaning is, as has already been presented, the Buddha taught 10 because these are clearly visible, they are obvious, and because they are so coarse. And if by avoiding them or engaging in the virtuous components, then we can either avoid tremendous suffering, or we can accumulate great wholesome virtue. So it's for this reason that the Buddha summarized the presentation of karma into these 10.
Onda di lelam ju se na giwe lelam ju da migiwe lelam ju sung gui bigi na gyumse di da duschine de duschin jerim che du ju se ju bare da dine 미게위 레람주단 게위 레람주사디 노데지다 텐주에 가와 송요를 룽가와 송요를세네 텐주에 가와 송요는 죄를 송요를 해제데 죄레스 델레 체롱 뒤네니 게단 미게 지릭바 레게 람니 줄 송소.
So this first part of this outline, the principal teaching on the 10 paths of action, is where Lama Tsongkhapa is showing that this presentation of the 10 paths of action comes from the Buddha himself, as well as from the commentaries from the great Indian masters. So Lama Tsongkhapa has now presented this, and now he shows sources establishing the sources. So the first is from a great Pandit. So a source is the Shastra, the treasury of Abhidhamma. Categorizing the most obvious among them, he taught the paths of action as 10, virtuous and non-virtuous, respectively.
Lege lam de jul song so se ne gewe le lam ju da mi gewe le lam ju jirik ba se da gewe le lam ju chi da mi gewe le lam ju la so ba do si ore se de lo bi yin ji do si ore se di yue ba de kar sen korong ge yang kar sung go sen di do le sung bi sung so se do le sung ore se wa da ne lege lam ju ne sung so se de do na le de sung ba re se korong ya lo bi yin de sung de de ju di ga wa sung do le sung ore se do na ma kong do sung go da.
The author of the Treasury of Abhidhamma is Vasubandhu, great Indian Pandit. So he's saying in this verse that so we have in the second line, he taught, this then refers to the Buddha. So the Buddha categorized the paths of action as 10, and he categorized these 10 by drawing on what is particularly obvious. And therefore, we should understand the 10 as a general summary rather than something close to a general summary by which one can come to understand karmic, the presentation of karma, rather than being an exhaustive presentation. And these 10 there are 10 that are both 10 that are virtuous, and there are 10 that are non-virtuous.
Lung namje le ja dina ja namje le ja nganam sungshi yigi raptam de ne lugi mige wada dami ji kasa lugi mige wada miji jings ne lelam sumbo dida rapchang na transong sungbi lamne tobar gyuru she songso sede lung namje na sanje dine songyo re che.
This quotation then from Vasubandhu references the Buddha, so references sutras. And now the next quotation is from a sutra, the exegesis of the Vinaya. Guard your speech, completely restrain your mind, and perform no non-virtuous deeds with the body. When you purify these 3 paths of action, you will attain the path taught by the sage.
Nala nganam sungshin yigi raptam de se da ganjele nganzo nganam sungshe ngagi kone anjigi jun chama sisu dene shigme senda de koso yigi raptam de se sosuge samlonala ya de dine ngagi kone jun chama sisu june shigme sebegi samlya shigme sme kele damjache jego reso de desun jeya도 da ngagi kone migewa joti sonyache. Then Luigi Mige Daj, Luigi Mige Wada, Mijing said the Denigi, that Luigi Conegang, Lunga Yusmuko, because Luigi Conega, Penesoja, the Majimba Lemba, then Chig, Royala Sawin, Chigme, Sebe, Semki Dushan, Kilinja Dushan, Damjas Damguri, SS, Dine Damguri, SS. Luigi Mige Wada, Mijing said, the 제 이기 랍담스도 이 삼로 셈기 지금 해 담자고 힐린지 그래서 제자다 당아지래 이 숨레 당보 삼로나네 나에게 지금 매 삼로게 담고 와 삼로 갈 땅에서 숨어야 돼 삼로 숨고 와 나이 그거네 류가 유심 요거네 그래서 나이 그거네 준식이 매 준식이 매 참아지기 매서 나이 그거네 담고 와 나이 그거네 숨고 와 되네 류주거네 제바대야 되네 류주거네 소주 받아 마지막에 미상을 소주 받아서 이게 지금 해서 샘게 담자샤고 와 디나시 나래네 되는 이기래네 이 납심지기메 뇌심지기메 로다두시메 셈게 두신 켈렌 담셈게 삼다 셈게 담제 송요도 더 송고마다 셈이 마산 송야셔 말마다 진짜 디네자다 류이가서 나는 송시 이기 랍담데 스리 삼로이고네다 지금에 셈베 송 되네 이주권 류주권에 된 지금에 셈베 송야다 되네 이주권에 납심 뇌심 로다디게 지금에 셈베다 셈나로 파두신 담자제 켈린제 담자 되는 바 지금의 에센베도 젠 지금 말씀 송고를 해서 송고로다.
Looking at the first two lines from the Buddha, guard your speech, completely restrain your mind, perform no non-virtuous deeds with the body. So this then refers to the 10 non-virtues. So guard your speech. So guard your speech from engaging in lying or divisive speech or harsh speech or purposeless speech. But it's not sufficient. It's not sufficient to only guard your speech. You need to, this second part, completely restrain your mind from doing so. You need to eventually abandon any wish to lie or to engage in divisive speech, harsh speech, or purposeless speech. And so too in terms of physical behavior, and perform no non-virtuous deeds with the body. You need to, the starting point, abandon killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. But you need to restrain your mind from even wanting to kill or to steal or to engage in sexual misconduct. So with both the verbal non-virtues and the physical non-virtues, the initial training is to refrain from engaging in them. But the deeper training that one needs to slowly develop is to abandon the mental wish to engage in the physical, verbal non-virtues. And then further meaning, to completely restrain your mind, is also to restrain your mind from the three mental non-virtues of covetousness, harmful intent, and wrong views.
아니 되네기 나되네 류가가기 숨제 아니 이기 시제가기 시제 이기 숨제 내가 무슨에도 숨도와 지사디 담야디 이기 담고그래서 이기 랍도 담선 땜부치네 바 숨고그래서 안데슈라 다 이기 삼로서 이기 납선에서 로도 숨디야 딩üm도 담고그래서 아주 여러와 되네 대 미제제 레람 숨보 디다 랍장나 두시네 담제바 바 되는 숨바이나 다 레람 숨보 저기 릉아 이숨이 레람 숨디 바직 랍 장나서 두시 송여도 바 장디바 나 사바기 마주 바다 나를 깨와디게나 바 다로야지 책으로 랍 장나서
In the first line, we have here, completely restrain your mind. So the way to understand completely means that one needs to, whilst initially one needs to restrain oneself from physical and verbal misdeeds, one needs to also restrain one's mind. But the way we need to restrain one's mind is in a manner that is stable. In other words, not sporadic. And that is the meaning of completely restrain your mind. It's in one's initial training, one restrains one's physical and verbal behavior. Then one develops one's mind so as the very wish to engage in physical, verbal, and non-virtue, one starts to abandon that. And that abandonment will be sporadic. But eventually we need to get to the point where one's mind is completely restrained. In other words, there is never the thought to lie and so forth. And by doing so, the third line, you will purify these three paths of action. So by engaging like this, training one's mind in this way, one will purify past non-virtues and refrain from accumulating new non-virtues.
Dine, 제가 데니게 장바이나 dine 장송 송비 람네 토벌 교로스네. 제가다 데니게 릉아 유스미 예바디 바 셈기 바랍도 지템보제 담제 송여도 데니 독초 다 개화 주디 냠레 도시에 데네 장송 송비 람네 토벌 교로스네. 장송 템바상 유줌된 데기 다 상예기 송비게 람 냠수 렘발라 데네 안 탈비고 바다. 근데 상예고 바도 토벌 토그리에 사시 송거 장소 송비 람네 토벌 교스 데네 냠소 렘발라 데네 상요 줌네 요 송비게 데 냠네 제발라 데네 탈바다 상요고 본 토그리에서 토야디 토제 송와디 토그리에서.
The final line, you will attain the path taught by the sage. This then refers to initially developing the 10 virtuous karmic paths. These are the opposite of the 10 non-virtuous karmic paths. So one guards one's speech, completely restrains one's mind, and performs no physical misdeeds. And one does so training successively, purifying these paths of action. And one also does so not only from restraining, but from adopting or cultivating the opposite, the 10 virtuous karmic paths. And through the cultivation of these 10 virtuous karmic paths, one eventually leads to the accumulation of those mental paths, which lead to the spiritual development through the paths of accumulation, resulting in the final path of no more training, arising as a Buddha.
송고래 송로다 지자디 송나가데 송고래 세는 아주 그신 주주나는 숨바 나신진 전시제 주주나라 류기 근데 지기 류가게 미냐바 송하다 근데 셈기 미냐바 송하 셈 미냐바 송하세 손데 다간제 전시신 된제네 전비 시신기 된디기 도시네 나게 준시하다 된디기 도시 용구되면도 시신이 제바지 된디기 된디 시신이 된디기 기디네 and the Geshe get the nigger and the Migi take tennis jebaina, the two senecasore, the table, and so did it young already up Marisi, Yuen Toyata, and did Bambaina, and Delet in answer Kivachimanga, when you go about Toyata, and Delet in the Tarba Tamji be go about Toyat, Gawasaguba, then in the Hako Wache, then Hako and then Jambigi, and Jambigi, the cause. Tin Zao in Jimes Tempa Dena, Gavadu de Yana, Duju Data Datalia, Tempo de Chickens in Tempe, Jen to Je, and Jehodi, that Jen Shin Denje, or to get to go a chago rather.
Way to abandon the 10 non-virtues and to cultivate the 10 virtues is, as we've been looking at all year in our Wednesday night classes on Shantideva's engaging in the Bodhisattva's way of life. It's through relying on the two friends of the practitioner of vigilance and mindfulness that one will both restrain from non-virtue and engage in the accumulation of virtue. So for this, So for the skilled spiritual practitioner, they develop vigilance, which is ever aware of one's mind. Whatever one is engaging in, whether sitting quietly or engaging in one's normal daily activities, vigilance keeps watch of the mind, watching to ensure that the mind stays virtuous, free of the afflictions. And as soon as an affliction is noted by vigilance, mindfulness immediately recalls the faults of the afflictions and brings to mind an antidote, returning the mind thereby back to virtue. So this is something that is initially cultivated for quite a period on the meditation cushion, but needs to be brought by the committed spiritual practitioner needs to be brought from the meditative cushion into their daily activity and eventually into their interactions with others. That whatever the practitioner is engaged in, they are quietly, peacefully watching their own mind, less concerned with what's happening around them, more concerned with how their mind is relating to that. With such a skill then, the spiritual practitioner can ensure that whatever they are doing, it is virtuous. Whatever they are doing is under the influence of the motivation they set themselves, the motivation perhaps of bodhicitta, the motivation to become a Buddha for the sake of others. In this way, they ensure that whatever their mind is thinking about, or whatever they are engaging in, talking to others, sitting quietly, that their mind is virtuous in accordance with their motivation. So this is eventually what one comes to, but the starting point is to ensure that the 10 non-virtues are refrained from and the 10 virtues are engaged in. So we've looked at tonight the need to use the terminology in the middle of the paragraph, the need to adopt virtue, to adopt these virtuous paths of karma, and to reject the non-virtuous karmic paths. When we see that it says we need to reject non-virtue, how to do so? One needs to abandon or reject the non-virtuous karmic paths, the 10 non-virtuous karmic paths. And when it says adopt, what should we be adopting? They're opposite, the 10 virtuous karmic paths. And we also saw in the verses quoted the very source for this presentation of the 10 non-virtues and the 10 virtues, and that was from the Buddha himself, and we saw this through a quotation from the exegesis of the Vinaya, as well as a quotation from one of the great pandits, Vasubandhu.
And that Dinige Sanyi, Dini Lelam Juice, the Sungu, Kimjan Karelamna, Chazan Migi Lelam Juice, Miguel at Benanzu, that Migi Lelam Juice, and Anzu in the Mugini, Migi, Lunga use Migi Leti, Le Judis, Judila, Migi Lelam Juice. There, Jew Migi Lelam Juice, Sungu, but the Kimjan Karesana, deep Shichewares, Kanama, the deeper Chembores, Carson Anzulia, Jung Devota, Jung Yong, Pechima, Della Dene Anzuke, Nansol Market, Yawa Ida, Dundral Market, Dunga Bottom, Yonko Etiquette, Della de Yongo, the Dishi Chewares, Chazandiki, Dipang was, Dipan Shabaina, Di Dojo, Kiwi, Lelam Judy Yamlin, Jewors, Di Jevana, Di Dojo, Kiwi, Lelam Judy Yamlin Jevana, Della Dene, and Kiwachima, Mondioko Montoya. Na tarpa na temji gibe ko wa thoye di shidin jeba le de yong ko le de ne za manzul ya mi gi le lam ju de ngo so di pha pang ka sung sha ba ina ma so le ke wa ma dung han yong ba de yong de ko ka ru ko le di do so ge wi le lam ju de nyam se le de di nyam se le ba le de ke wa chi ma ngo de ko ba thoye de le de ne du se ne nyam ne ko de ko ne ko de phe je tarpa da temji gibe ko wa to tu ko le de ne za da san yi gi du se ne dor du se ne Shipto Ben Giaba Mason Jetin Dordution Par Jendution Son Esin.
We also saw the reasons why the non-virtues are presented in a group of 10. Because it's not that all non-virtue that beings can possibly engage in are included within these 10. Rather, the Buddha taught these 10 because on one hand, they're easy to recognize. They are obvious as harmful. But moreover, the engaging in any of these 10 leads to powerful non-virtue that can lead to rebirth in the lower realms and intense suffering there. So therefore, not only are these 10 non-virtues easy to recognize, but and that they are non-virtuous is readily acceptable, there is great purpose in abandoning them, because through abandoning them, one refrains from accumulating causes that will lead to immense suffering. So even if a practitioner does nothing more than abandon the 10 non-virtues, at least then they are reducing greatly the non-virtue they are accumulating. But ideally, every practitioner will engage in their opposite, the 10 virtues, because these two are obvious to recognize as being virtuous, as being beneficial, and moreover, by engaging in such virtuous activities, one creates the causes for excellent future rebirths. And excellent future rebirths are indispensable not just because they are better than the alternative, but because they present the opportunity to continue one's progress of spiritual development, progressing towards enlightenment. So hence, Buddha taught this summary, the summary into 10. So then, thank you. We can conclude there for tonight. But if you have some questions, then certainly we can ask you questions. Then thank you. We'll continue tomorrow morning. Thank you.